delight to be here, actually. This is my, probably one of my first presentations. Well, it is the first presentation for the multidimensional show, but it's the first presentation in Birmingham, which is the city of my birth, can you believe? So it's, although I've done other workshops and things in different areas, this is the first time I've been here and done this. I'm usually sort of all over the world, and the UK seems to be sort of not really ready for the information yet, which is a bit strange, but there we go. Now, this information, this particular presentation, which is based upon the road to sentience and the greater reality, is basically from most of the books that I've written, which are channeled works. But the second half, the greater reality side of it, where we talk about event space and different realities, etc., is from the new book, which I'm going to. Oops, there. Oh, it's not turned on, is it? It's on. Okay. Which is the new book. It works. There we are. Called The Curators. So this is an unashamed plug. It's not released yet. It comes out in September, but it goes into a lot of information about the different realities we exist within, and you know, we don't always know what reality we're in or what particular space that we're in. So that's what we're going to do later. Talk about that. So. I can't work out which way this goes. Right, wrong way around. Got it. So, what I'm going to talk about today is a difference between an entity and a being, because there's a difference, although we do talk about, you know, in one word we say we're a being, the other the way we say we're an entity, but there's a difference between the two, and I want to describe that difference. The second thing I want to do is go through the 20 steps that an energy goes through to become sentient, because there's a difference in the way that a being is created versus an entity is created, and I'll explain that later. Then I want to go through a reminder for people of what our multiversal environment is and how it's created. It's in most of the books I've written, but it's nice to understand it in some detail again. Then I want to go through quite a thorny subject about time and explain what time is, and that leads me into the next part of the presentation, which is about what the environments that we do exist within, rather than a time-space-based environment, which physicists and theoretical physicists like to try and use. And of course, within that, there are different versions of reality. So let's have a look at this thing about entities and beings. Who believes we're an entity? Nobody believes we're an entity. Who believes we're a being? Nobody believes we're a being. Well, there is a difference. Okay? There's a difference between the two. An entity is basically an individualized unit of sentience and energy that is created by another entity. For example, the environment that we're in and that which created us, what we sometimes call God or Source or the One or that which I am, created a smaller individualized version of itself. In various different scriptures and in the Bible, it says that man was created in the image of God. It's not man itself, it's the energy. It's a smaller version of God. So our true energetic self, as I like to call it, which we also call the higher self, or the oversoul, or the Hindus call the Godhead, is actually a smaller individualized unit of that. Okay? What we are is an even smaller version of that. So our soul, if you want to call it that, is a smaller individualized aspect of that which we really are. And that soul is one of potentially 12 that can be projected into various different environments, the physical universe being one of them, to be able to experience that environment, learn, and subsequently evolve. That evolution is what we're here for. We're here to evolve. We're here to experience different things. And our higher self, or true energetic self, or Godhead, or oversoul, does the same thing, and so does Source or God, and so does its creator. Everything is to do with evolving, progressing, understanding, knowing, achieving, creating, uncreating, improving the creation. And so that which we are is here to be an evolutionary engine, if you want to call it that. But we're created, we're separated out from another entity. And so all of us here, by the way, are generally entities. So who's an entity? Right. A being is something which is different, and this is what really the part of this presentation is all about. A being is energy that has become sentient through what you could arguably call Darwinian evolution. Now, what happens there is that that energy sort of groups together naturally, just clumps together, and gets bigger and bigger slowly. And then it sort of gravitates towards other groups of energy of the same or similar type and gets bigger and bigger slowly. And as this size of energy becomes greater, it starts to develop a tendency or a predominance to go and seek out other energies that are similar or same and group together. That creates something which we call intelligence. And so the being starts to become created through this Darwinian effect, this sort of grouping together of energies. So the being is something which is an evolved entity, if you want to call it that, that's evolved on its own, whereas an entity itself is something which is individualized from a higher level entity or a bigger entity. So if we know that what we are is part of God, essentially, and God is part of its creator, what I'm told to call the origin, then we know that we were created. We are a creation. And the human body is something we use to experience this particular environment. It's a vehicle we use. One of countless thousands that we use in the physical universe. We don't just use the human body, we use other vehicles as well. We sometimes call them aliens. There are different frequencies within the physical universe as well. That's why we sometimes can't see them, because they're out of our visual range. So we use the human body, along with many other different form factors, to experience, learn, and evolve in different environments within the physical universe, within different frequencies. But I'll explain a bit more about that later. So in essence, the entity is the creation. The being is that which creates itself. And so if we know the entity an entity is created, it makes sense, doesn't it? We know that we are created, and therefore it's got purpose. But an entity, a being, has to go through a process itself to become sentient. And I'm going to go through that process right now. So, oops, we've gone backwards. I've got to get used to this. Right, there we go. I'm not used to this going up and down. So, the energy that becomes sentient in terms of a being, okay, is created through this attraction to similar or same energies. It's a purely automatic function, basically, created through, you could call it gravity, energetic gravity, where they're clumped together. And it creates this desire to be together through normal attraction. It sort of has this similar or same sort of signature of energy and makes it acceptable. It's in harmony. What happens then is, after this active seeking out of these different components of energy, it creates a sort of limited intelligence. It's got the ability to decide which energy, or which group of energies, to get close to clump next to become part of. So it decides whether to be part of you or part of you, for example. This leads on to another state of beingness, where there's a limited recognition of similar or same energies and the ability to understand which energies or which similarity is different. So we start to create this sort of condition where it can seek out to join that pile of energy rather than that pile of energy. And what we do is we create a condition where it knows what it wants to do and where it wants to go to. Think of it in terms of groups of people. We want to join this club rather than that club. And that's what it does. And this creates a condition where essentially these separated out aspects of energy and intelligence joined together actually become one. So rather than seeking out being part of you and then being two parts but part of you, we become one. And that's what happens with the energies. They decide to become one. So this intelligence that was minor intelligence that's deciding to be over there with that group of sort of semi-intelligent energy rather than over there with that semi-intelligent energy and be separate to it but be part of it, like a group of people, becomes one, becomes a collective. And so it trades its individuality slowly for being a bigger level of intelligence. So it sacrifices its individuality to create a larger intelligence, a bigger self-awareness. And this is when they can start to create a much bigger body of energy and intelligence by joining together. This creates collective consciousness. So it's consciousness where different parts are doing different roles, if you want to call it that, on behalf of the overall collective. It's a bit like parallel processing, if you want to call it that. You know, one part of your computer is doing one thing, whereas another part of your computer is doing something else. And the answer comes out at the same time. You think you've asked 2 questions or 3 questions, okay, and it all comes, and it's being done by one thing, but actually it's being done by many things. I wonder what the processing power of a Google search engine is, how it achieves all of these multiple answers together from a couple of key words. So the creation of the collective consciousness, the ability to think beyond the self, but within the self, is also created. And this is an automatic function created upon the collective decision to join larger bodies of energy. They actively seek out larger bodies of energy to do the same thing, to create another larger single body. So it's this point, the creation of the single consciousness is really created from the collective. So it's no longer a collective, it's starting to become a much larger being. Okay? I'm trying not to say entity here. It's very difficult because we use entity and being in the same sentence most of the time. So I have to try and be careful with the words. So the creation of this single consciousness in lieu of the collection of conscious intelligences is a landmark decision that's made. It's giving up the self to become part of a bigger self. How many of us are a bit worried about when the physical form demises, whether we lose our individuality? You're all happy to become part of the sea. Yeah? You're all, yeah? When we lose individual consciousness or individualisation, we're a bit like a raindrop in the sea. We have individuality, expanded consciousness, everywhereness, everythingness, knowing everything concurrently. That's what happens to a drop of water as it goes into the sea. It becomes the sea. It's a component of the sea, it becomes the sea. And so there's this, it's a landmark thing to do, to give up your individuality to become part of a much bigger being, which is being created. So now we get this active desire to increase the volume and intelligence quotient as a result of this giving up of this individuality. And so here the energy seeks to increase its volume by seeking out, attracting and absorbing, again, same or similar energies that are smaller than itself and that are not necessarily evolving. So that's like a bit like the Borg on Star Trek, you know, resistance is futile. A bigger being comes along and absorbs a smaller being. That smaller being becomes the bigger being, even though it might not have the intelligence associated with becoming a bigger being, so to speak. It allows itself to be absorbed because it has no choice, really. The bigger being just absorbs it. It becomes what it's supposed to be, a bigger being. Once we've got enough intelligence, there starts to become a change in the way that intelligence works. It starts to create. Initially, that creation is sort of random and haphazard, and you know, it does what it does, not particularly successful. But the desire to create is when the energy decides that it's reached a substantial size enough or big enough and starts to create things itself. It may be rudimentary, but it has intention behind it. So creativity is a milestone, quite a large milestone, because it's intelligent creating, rather than just creating for creation's sake. Okay? Most things around us are created because we just do it. You know, we go for a walk. We create the walk. We don't know we're creating the walk, we just go for the walk, don't we? It's only when we think about, right, I want to go for a walk and I'm going to walk from here to here, and it might be a walk up a mountain. That's intelligent creativity. Because there's an intention behind the creativity to do something. Once the energy, as this large enough sort of state of beingness, so to speak, to be able to intelligently create or create with intention or desire to do something, it starts to recognise the reason for that desire. And so this creation and the desire to create may be a single action or a multiple series of actions. In the single condition, the creation can be a product of the desire to create, but that desire may be transitory and therefore only occur once. But once the recognition is established as a function of the being wanting to repeat and therefore desires the products of the act of creation, irrespective of what it is, it becomes an intention with a reason behind the desire to create. And so it becomes a higher function. It's really a case of the energy is seeking to do something because it wants to do it. But sometimes there's no focus. Creation for creation's sake, because you want to create something, is pretty random, isn't it? It's not really doing something. It's like creating a motor car or building a motor car, but not knowing what the motor car is going to do. You know, you make a model. What's the model do? It sits there on your sideboard. If you create a motor car because you want the motor car to transport you from A to B, that's got focus. So initially, that creativity has no focus. So because it's creation for creation's sake. It's just doing it to see if it could do it. I want to create today. I'm going to create this. Okay, let's do it. But when he starts to understand that the creation or creativity can be useful, it starts to change his focus and has a directed outcome. So it'll create the motor car, for instance, to give itself transportation, to go anywhere in a random way, from wherever it is to somewhere else. It creates something with a purpose. So this is intelligent use of the energy's creative ability to produce something from the energies around it, and it has that focus to create a desired product, whatever that product is. And this, from our perspective, is the motor car. But it could be anything. It could be a cake, it could be a piece of clothing, it could be a piece of art. It's anything that we want to do that allows us to do something because we're enjoying what we're doing. Once it's done this a number of times, it starts to think, I've created this, but could I do it better? So it starts to analyse the product of its creation. It starts to understand what it's done, how it's done it, and starts to want to do a better job. So it starts to reflect on its creativity and process and enter into a thought that results in modification. Note, though, here, that although we've got the motor car example, that the creation is fairly low grade, fairly limited in what it does. But we've got this condition now where it's starting to think about what it's done and how it's going to do it. And so if it sees something, if it creates something, and it looks at it and it thinks, okay, I can do that now. But actually, this motor car, it's got square wheels. Doesn't go very far on those square wheels. So it starts to look at it and say, okay, I can modify it. I can modify this creation and make it better. So we've got to the point where the energy is on the point of sentience, but without tipping the balance into sentience. Here the energy is able to think, experience, and create in a rational way. So it's starting to do something and modify what it's done. It's creating. It's responsible for the creation and modifying that creation to make it better. Lots of religious texts. It's a big word, religion, isn't it? I have trouble saying religion. Okay? Talk about how God improved us, how our Creator improved us, because there needed to be a change in what the human form was and other bodies around the physical universe that made it do a better job in the environment it's in. The human form has changed over the years because of frequential changes and environmental changes. But this changing creates a condition where it experiences something else, not just the creation, the satisfaction of the creation, the responsibility for the creation, and the modification to improve the creation. It evolves. And it starts to think, this is good. I think I like this. Everything we do results in evolution, an evolutionary progression forwards. And so if we can understand what the evolution is and how we achieve evolution, then we can progress and evolve more. How many of you do something when you're of service to somebody and you feel really good about it? We all do, don't we? You know, if we see somebody struggling with something, we open the door for them, or they've dropped some cans of tomatoes or something in the supermarket, and help them back, put them back into back into the shelf, for instance, or back into the basket they've got. We've helped them out. We've put them before us. So that's the creation of being of service. So it's the accrual of evolutionary content and the recognition of how to accrue it, which is more important. So it's increasing, this energy now, this being is increasing its intelligence and breadth in its personality. And it's recognizing its preferential desires. It's also recognizing that it accrues evolutionary content as a result of a variety of experiences. Okay. And those experiences can create learning and this other piece of progression called evolution. Once this occurs, another landmark, another milestone happens with the energy. It changes status. It goes from being intelligent, self-aware, creative, responsible energy to becoming sentient. Sentience is an instantaneous, pan-energetic effect that can only happen when the being experimentally recognizes its own evolution and how it accrues that evolution. At this point, the energy is and can be classified as a new energetic sentient being, not an entity. It's created itself over, countless millennia, if you want to use an earth-based method of understanding where we are in events. But it's understanding what it is. So the recognition of sentience is a separate function within the original level of energies or energies, so to speak. The recognition of personal sentience is achieved when the energy, now being an energetic sentient being, experiences the movement of its sentience within the volume of energies. So this is interesting now because it's starting to recognize that although it's born from energy, it recognizes that what it is now, its sentience, isn't specifically what it is. And so it has this ability now to know that it's what carries the sentience isn't what it is. The sentience was born from energies going through this similar or same evolutionary progression, so to speak, clumping together of similar or same energies, creating intelligence. It starts to recognise that what it is now as a sentient being, I nearly said entity there, sentient being, is really what it is. So it starts to recognise that it can disassociate that sentience from the energies that it's in. You can move it. You can detach the sentience and then commandeer other energies and occupy those energies. So it starts to realise that it can move around and move the sentience from a group of energies or an energy and then to another group of energies or energy. So in essence, this is what we are. our soul, our smaller aspect of our true energetic self, isn't energy, it's sentience within a body of energies. That body of energies is either given to it by a larger entity or being, because an entity can be created by a being if it separates out part of its sentience and energies and gives it individuality, or itself. And so it starts to recognise that it can go from place to place. So our true energetic self should actually be called the true sentient self. Sentience and energy together is the true energetic self. But what we are is sentience. And so we, and that bigger part of us which remains disincarnate, which is part of a much bigger body of sentience, which is part of a much bigger body of sentience, is what we really are. We're sentient entities. What I've just described is how energy can become sentient, and that sentience can detach itself from the energies that it was originally created through and become its own level of sentience in its own right. When we incarnate, we incarnate into a body of energies. The physical form is low frequency energy. There's spiritual physical aspects to what we are, which we can't see with the human eye. But they all perform a function of helping the gross physical exist. That's another body of energies. And the body of energies that allows the sentience to come into the human form is also energy. But the thing that drives the body is the sentience. Whether it's self-created, and therefore it's classified as a being, or whether it's created by another entity or a being. How many of you read Barbara Brennan's works? Yeah? Yes? No? She's very good. She was a NASA scientist. That's why I like her. And she was able to work with energies and started to heal people. She teaches people all over the world now. I think she's retired, actually. But she's very good at it. And she explained things in a scientific way. And what she's worked with makes a lot of sense, because she says that the soul comes down into the body and gets distributed. Well, in my understanding, the soul comes down through the Hara line, which is like a small tube that protects the frequencies associated with the aspect or soul, goes to a place called the core star, and then distributes. Once the energies go towards the Tantien, which helps to energise the body and drive it, and the sentience goes to a place called the soul seat. And that's what we are. So the sentience and the energy that drives the body are separated out, but connected through the core star. And so we have this condition where our sentience drives the body. We think that we are seeing it, that our brain is the function of what we are, but it's not. The sentience is somewhere else. It's just that because we see things through the eyes, which just happen to be positioned in the head, close to the brain, we think that's where our sentience lies. If our eyes were down here, we think our sentience lay down here, wouldn't we? Because what we see with the human body is where we think we are, in actual fact. Okay. So we experience, learn and evolve by going into different parts of an environment which is created as part of the separation out of the structure of our creator, our higher entity or source entity, if you want to call it that, and experience, learn and evolve. Okay. That environment is the multiverse. So, there's lots of thoughts about this with theoretical physicists, but what I've picked up here is my current understanding. There were people after me, and obviously concurrent with me, who have other levels of depth of understanding of what the multiverse is we exist in. But my understanding is it's created through the separation out of structure of one of our larger creative entities. In this instance, it's called the source entity. It's created through 12 dimensions. These dimensions are much bigger pieces of structure that mankind thinks that exist. You know, mankind or science says we live in the 3 dimensions, but that's just a metric. height, width, and breadth. What's the fourth dimension? Yeah? Time? Hang on to that. Okay. These dimensions split out into basic components. They generally follow the same structure. That is apart from the first full dimension, which works in a different way. So from the second full dimension up to the 12th full dimension, they work in the same way. They split out into 3 subdimensions, and then they further subdivide into 12 frequency levels or frequency bands, those being the basic building blocks of the dimensions. Each of these frequency levels or frequency bands from the second full dimension upwards can and does support a self-contained, simultaneous, not parallel, that's something else, I'll describe that in a moment, universal environment. So for every frequency band, there's a universe associated with it, or the capability of supporting a universe. So we have 11 times 3 times 12, which is 396 frequencies, or frequency levels, not the same as what mankind thinks frequencies are, much more complicated structure, and therefore 396 universes. But we haven't dealt with the first full dimension yet. Okay? First full dimension houses all the lowest frequencies within the multiverse, so it operates differently. It splits out into 3 subdimensions, but then collapses back into 1 composite subdimensional component, which only allows 12 frequencies to be created. But those 12 frequencies are all so low that they're all needed together to create a universal environment. So we have the rather unique condition where we have a whole dimension required to create one universe. And that one universe is also unique because it has 12 frequencies to create it. And those 12 frequencies are what we exist within. And what we see here now is the first 3 of those frequencies. So mankind has almost got it right in terms of 3. It's 3 frequencies, not 3 dimensions. That is what is here now. Remember, dimensions in science, by and large, are a metric. The rest of it is theoretical, based upon obscure maths which is well beyond my capability. And probably most of us as well. The human form occupies, or uses 10 of those frequencies. What we see here is the first 3, and then there's 7 more that help it to work. Okay? There's 4 more of spiritual-physical energies, sort of a mixture of gross physical and energetic, so to speak. And then there's 3 more which act as like a step-down function that allows the separated out aspect of sentient energy from our true energetic selves, Godhead, or Oversoul, to come down the frequencies and then integrate with a lower frequency vehicle, this body. Okay. Environmental suit that allows us to experience this particular environment in the way it's supposed to be experienced. Yeah? Experiencing resistance, interacting with others, creating here, having to work at creating things rather than just thinking about creating, as Luke's just said. So the physical universe is unique, and that's why we come here, because we come down the frequencies to experience, learn and evolve, but because we come down the frequencies, it reduces our communicative ability. And so we start to forget who we are, because this small piece of sentient energy that's now in the human body starts to associate itself with the human body. I said to Michael earlier, what we are is basically all the air on the earth. And what's put into the human body is what you fill a balloon with. And the only connection between the air in the balloon and all the air in the earth is what leaks out of this knot that's tied to keep the air in there. So you can imagine how slow the communication is to the point of non-existence almost. And how we, over time, doesn't exist, starts to associate itself with the human form to create a temporary personality we call the ego. Okay. But that's another lecture. Okay. And mobile phones make it worse. You should talk to my missus. You should really talk to my missus. She hates them. We just talked about time, haven't we? Okay. So what's the 4th dimension? Somebody said time. Where are we ascending into from this 3rd dimension? Supposedly third dimension. You're cheating. A lot of people say it's the fifth dimension. Okay? That can't be right. Because if time doesn't exist and we assign the fourth dimension to being time, then how can we bypass something that doesn't exist in our ascension? So that's a bit of a, poster on the wall. Actually, what you're trying to describe doesn't exist. Spiritual people use the fourth dimension nomenclature to describe time. But it can't be, because we're bypassing it. How can you we can't evolve, and we don't evolve, by jumping. Well, we can jump, but not from one dimension to another, unless we've gone through the stages that really allow us to go very close to where the two dimensions sort of join. But what we actually what we exist within is something called event space. Okay? Has anybody ever created a rubber band ball? Yeah? This illustration of what event space is, what we exist in, which isn't space-time, exists concurrently. Everything exists concurrently in event space. Everything we've done, will do, should do, could do, might do, probably will do, or the possible possibility of possible possibilities, all exists concurrently. I'm trying hard not to say all at the same time. Okay? But what it basically means is that everything we do has already happened. And because it's already happened, we can go into it. We can move into these different event spaces. There's more than one type of event space, by the way. I shall describe that in a moment. Which means that, I'm going to hate saying this, we can time travel because we go into different events. But how can that be? How is this event space connected? Is the first rubber band at the centre of the ball connected to the last rubber band on the outside of the ball? Yes or no? Yes, it is. Yeah. It's connected because it's indirect connection. Each rubber band is connected to each other directly through direct contact or indirectly because another rubber band is in contact with that other rubber band. So every rubber band in the rubber band ball is connected directly or indirectly, or both, depending upon where it is. And so that's the environment type we live in. So although we've got this multiversal structure, which is static, we've also got parallel universes, parallel multiverses, which are these different spaces, events, full of events, things that we do, things that happen collectively, globally. But there's different types of event space. That's worrying, isn't it? Event space is an area or volume of space within the origin and therefore the source entity and therefore what we are in that exists as a parallel function of that space. It's space overlapping space or space within and without space. And everything exists in terms of events and not in terms of time as a result of that. So everything exists concurrently. We can't understand that, we can't get our heads around it because we're in a low frequency environment. We're not expansive enough here to be able to understand what really happens in the environment that we normally exist within. There's something called the demarcation between event spaces. This is the line of non-interaction that's drawn between one event space and another. Okay? They are separate. There's something called the start of an event space as well, which is later, on the bottom. But insufficient demarcation in terms of the demarcation line between one event space and another, can create a lack of integrity of an event space, and therefore an alternative reality instead. So we can go there and experience both. So how do we do that? Well, we don't, but our true energetic self does, because it exists in a higher frequency within the multiverse in an event space. However, if there's sufficient demarcation between event spaces, it creates another robust event space. So that's not a parallel condition, that's a separate version that exists separately and can therefore create its own series of event spaces or its own parallel conditions. Now, logically speaking, for the human mind, and it's not specifically true, but there are starts of events and ends of events. So a start of event is when an event space can allow any changes to have its own start of event, even when there appears to be no real start. So basically, this is when something happens that is so subtle, but it has a powerful enough demarcation line between one event and another event to create two separate events. Therefore, logically speaking, there's an end of event. And again, event space can allow any changes to have its own end of event, even when there appears to be no real end. So there can be an event space or another environment created and uncreated or finished, even when there's no visible means or no logical means for why it should have started or why it didn't, why it should have ended. But it's the things that happen collectively around us make that possibility possible. We can get event streams as well. And this is a series of natural events within an event space. So this is when things happen logically. We can see them sometimes here on Earth. For example, you can see the directed outcome of something because you have a thought, I'm going to create that, I'm going to work towards creating that. That's a series of events. Travelling here, you had a series of events, didn't you? You did various different things to get here. You woke up in the morning, you got out of bed, you maybe went to the bathroom, like we always do. Then you go to there'll be breakfast maybe, get in the car, go on the road, the motorway, find this place, park the car, get here, sign in, sit down. Series of different events. Very simple way of describing it, by the way, but that's what happens. That's an event stream within an event space. But there is something else called an event space horizon. I love this. Sounds a bit technical, doesn't it? Event space horizon. And that's when event spaces together are happening together. So in one of the books, I think it's Beyond the Source, book 2, I was taken by one of the entities to a place where I was seeing everything concurrently. And the way it looked at first was like you were in a 360 spherical cinema and everything was there. And you may have seen some of these things sometimes. There's like little TV screens everywhere, and each TV screen was a different event. And then they rotated around everything else. And then other events came in, it all rotated around. And then it became one big event. But it was there was so much information going through that it became just nothing, like a white space. Because everything was there and nothing was there. And so the event space horizon is when we experience everything that is within the possibility of being experienced concurrently. There's something else called an event stream bubble as well. And this is where each event is a bubble of interaction, which it is really. It's got edges, starts and finishes in various different locations, different ways. It's a bubble of interaction between an entity or being and the environment it's working within. So this is, in the example of coming here, this is our event space. My event space was getting here in the morning. Getting out of bed at the hotel, Going for a shower, having breakfast, driving here, signing in. My event space. I interacted with the environment by driving here, with the individuals within the environment, in the hotel, checking in, checking out, having my breakfast. Meeting these two wonderful people, meeting you, my event space. But then my event space has interacted with your event spaces as well. So it becomes a bigger event space. There's also something called a micro event space, where it is well, basically I've just described a micro event space, but the bigger event space, event stream bubble, is when it's all together with collectively. The micro event space is basically relevant to an individual. These event spaces can happen concurrently to others. So we can create something called a parallel condition as a result of that. So a parallel condition is a duplication of event space. It's the generation of a new but similar event space when a choice is made. So think of it in terms of you get off the bus and you turn right rather than turning left. You have a choice. Turn right, turn left. One of you goes that way. But because you've had a choice, there's another version of you that goes that way. And so there's two versions of you experiencing different things by going that way down the road versus that way down the road. Maybe there's a corner there. Maybe there's a group of shops. Maybe you bump into somebody you don't know before. Maybe you see somebody you do know. The experience changes, but it's parallelized. We don't know. We don't know we've gone. All we know is this is the main the main reality, so to speak, the main condition, the main event space. But we don't know if we've changed. We don't know if this is the main one. There is a main one, but I can guarantee you now this isn't it. We're not in we're not in what you would classify as being the dominant event space or reality. Well, I've just touched about realities.
Sorry, you've only separated the two, but every time you have a choice, you separate again and again.
It does, it fractalizes. If you, yeah. If you think about it, the tree is a perfect example of the fractalization, the generation of event spaces in parallel conditions. You know, a branch goes up, it separates out, and it separates out again. You know, it goes 2, 3, 4 times. You could have 5 choices, for instance. Multiple choice questionnaire. Think of the permutations in that. You might get 74% one time, 84% another time, 12 the next time. Yeah. There are countless thousands of versions of ourselves experiencing slightly different things within our environment, interacting with people in slightly different ways, experiencing the environment in slightly different ways, being in different locations within the environment and experiencing that in slightly different ways. So again, there's thousands and thousands of us, of me's and you's and you's, all doing the same thing but slightly differently. So it's not just 2, Mel pointed out, but these things, they terminate, okay? Basically, an event space terminates when it's for the individual, the individual's event space and the collectivist event spaces, terminate when the evolutionary opportunity has been reached. And then it goes back into the nearest event space, the nearest mainstream, so to speak. So think of it as being 2 branches on a tree, then just collapsing back into one branch. And then when the evolutionary progression finishes in that one, it collapses back into the next branch, so to speak. So they expand fractally, and they collapse back together in the inverse of fractals. They join together, back together again.
What happens to the conscious me then? It refers back.
You don't know it because you're in one particular stream, aren't you? So the you that's here now doesn't know that another you couldn't get here, or decided not to be here, or was late. You don't know that because you're part of this particular event stream. Your true energetic self, which exists in a higher frequency level, and a significantly higher level of sentience, experiences all of those fractalized versions of you concurrently. So it experiences all the different ways in which you're experiencing the same thing concurrently. But this little bit doesn't. Certainly not in these low frequencies, because we don't have the computational power, so to speak. Yeah? So what's a reality? I was going to ask you this question, I'm giving it away now. So the reality is an environment and an interactive condition that we can create as a desired function of the event space or event stream. It's what we created. What we create. Some people say to me, I don't like this reality, it's horrible. Well, change it. You can change your own reality. You can refuse to be in this particular reality and create what you want to be. So that tells you something, doesn't it? That really a reality is generated by us. And what we perceive as being our interaction with that reality is also created by us. So it's perception-based. The alternative reality is generally created, though, by lots of us together. Okay? We create a group-based perception. Birds of a feather flock together, don't they? Yeah? We can either choose to like something or not like something. So we go and live with people or hang out with people who have the same sorts of thoughts, same desires, expectations, ways to grow, ways to experience. Conspiracy theories grow because people want to hear what the conspiracy is. That makes sense to me, I'll go with that. And they spread it.
You mentioned perception. Are we talking the dog wagging the tail or the tail wagging the dog?
Both. The chicken and the egg, which came first? They both came at the same time. Because we're in an environment where everything exists concurrently. Think of it in terms of the snake eating itself. Yeah? The snake's tail's in the snake's mouth. But it can't eat itself, can it? It's trying to, but it can't. That's the same, that's what it is. Yeah? There's a general thing called an overall reality, which is basically where we exist in the huge picture, the greater reality, so to speak. It's the reality that is part of our Creator's creator, the origin, which is a being, by the way, not an entity, because it was generated by this sort of clumping together of different or similar or same energies to create intelligence and then awareness and consciousness and sentience. So it's the greater reality, the bigger reality. Then we start to come down the scale. We get a multiversal reality. And that's the condition that's created by the governing entities responsible for maintaining a multiversal environment, the one specific to our Creator, our Source, our God, whatever you want to call it. And it involves everything. But it could also be multiple multiversal realities as well. Think of the computation of that. The fractalization of all the little realities within the multiverse, creating other parallel realities, parallel multiverses and parallel realities within those multiverses. Mind boggles, doesn't it, really? Going down again, we get to something called a universal reality. So this is like a smaller representation of the multiversal reality, but it's relative to a universe. It starts out to be almost the size of a multiverse, but then becomes universe-sized when a multiverse is separated out into smaller environments that we call universes. Coming down again, we get something called a global reality. And it's a further dissection of this overall theme of reality. It's basically an area the size of, let's say, a galaxy or so. It could also be smaller. Local reality is where it gets interesting. It's the official start of convolution within realities. This is a reality within a reality within the universal reality, which is within the multiversal reality. These local realities change in size and shape in terms of who's interacting with it within the local area. And then we've got something called the local individualized reality, which is relevant to small groups. We're in a local individualized reality right now. We're a small group, aren't we, really? About 40 of us here, so yeah, it's a small group. Small group could be country size as well, by the way. But it's starting to become further convolution, so to speak. And then finally we get to this individualized reality, which is where we create our own realities relevant to ourselves and what we want to experience and how we want to experience it. It's what entities or beings with individualized free will choose to create around them. In some instances, the fully individualized reality can create a full separation from the greater reality. We know of people who do take themselves away and become hermits, don't they? Or they live on their own and they don't interact with people. They sit in the house and click and collect, so to speak, and get their food coming into the house. They're living in their own small reality. So what we've got here is just a small portion of what the greater reality is, how an entity is created, how a being is created, what the multiverse is, its structure, what time is or not, this event space. And there's various different forms of event space, and there is various different forms of reality within event space as well. And so we've got enough time, because I think there's going to be some questions, to answer questions. There we are. Part of my multiverse. Or is it parallel multiverse? Any questions? Yeah, please. What happens after we die? Do you want the mechanics? Basically, the human form is an environmental suit, it's a body, it's a car. And the energy and the sentience that occupy it regroup. So the sentience moves from the soul seat down towards the core star. The energy that animates the body and occupies the 7 energy templates that create the gross physical, and program things like RNA and DNA, that sort of stuff, moves again towards the core star. So the energy from the tantian and the sentience from the soul seat move towards the core star. That then goes back up through the hara line, which is almost in the same place as the spine and the nervous system, up through wherever it goes to, back to the true energetic self. Okay, so when you have people who give us stories about near-death experiences, where they say, "Oh, I went through a tunnel went through out into the light." Basically, what they're experiencing is their sentience and the energy associated with the sentience that's animating the human form, going back through the hara line, which is minutely small. It's like a hypodermic needle, as an example. That's exaggerating. They go out of that, and they come out of the lower frequencies and go back into the higher frequencies. And there's too much to observe, because they're still working on low frequency thoughts, behaviours and actions based upon being here in low frequencies. So everything becomes white, because they haven't got the overall sort of call it computational power, to be able to absorb and interact with and understand everything that's around them straight away. So there might be a moment of, wow, and then it's like, whiteness. And the only way that they would understand it is if they stay there longer, and you get stories of people who've been talking to their guides and helpers and, you know, and seeing other bits and pieces like previously deceased friends who may have decided to allow themselves to be seen to get information and then come back down again. Then you get the story about, you know, they may experience their friends as being human beings. Well, they're not. They're just balls of sentient energy, the same as everybody else is. But they present themselves in a signature which is recognised, and that particular entity that's either going to demise or go back to their energies or is going to come back, recognises them as the last image that they had of them, which is, you know, their mother or father or friend.
So you still have free will.
At that point, you have free will, individualisation, until there is an analysis of how the incarnation went, the experience went. There's various different ways of describing it. Some people call it the life review. But basically, it's understanding how the guides and helpers, who are entities who aren't in the evolutionary cycle, but they're here to help us in the evolutionary cycle, experience, learn, and evolve through going through various different interactions with lower frequency environments or other environments, and you know how they've responded and how they've worked and how we've worked with them, and then we decide to go back into a form of communion with our true and energetic self. And there's various different forms of communion. One of them means complete dissolution of the individuality, and others are various different forms of diversification of it. There's in the AND dialogues, it explains it, and on my website, if you go to which is www.beyondthesource.org, and look for the events page, scale down to lectures, and then you can go on all the lectures I've done. There's PDF files, you can download them. And that explains the different types of communion that we have with our true and energetic self. Some maintain individuality and some don't. Depends upon what we were created for and whether the bigger us wants to keep that smaller part of us individualised, or whether it wants to absorb it for the moment. But while we go,
Is it free will? Free will?
there's, in terms of, in essence, eventually we will be reabsorbed totally into our true energetic self. And eventually, at the end of the evolutionary cycle, those true energetic selves will reabsorb back into the source, back into God, as you want to call it that. The only free will we really have, and this is going to be a bit controversial, is how we interact when we incarnate. Although we do have a plan of experiences, the life plan, so to speak, they're just a series of goals that we ideally would like to achieve while we're here. How we achieve those goals is up to us. That's the free will bit. Yeah? For example, I travelled from Wales yesterday to get here. I chose to drive in my car. I could have chosen a bus, or a train, or a taxi. Or if I was rich enough, fly from Cardiff Airport to Birmingham Airport. So there's those different ways of getting here. The goal being to get here. The free will part is how I get here. So that's the only real part of the free will that we actually do have. But that free will and how we interact with the free will, knowing that, you know, we don't really understand what the goal is, we have a feeling about it, is part of the way we evolve. And that we get the evolution on behalf of our true energetic self or higher self. And that evolution is also shared by the source as well, or God. Who gave me this knowledge and how do I know it's true? All through my life, I've had this sense of knowingness of stuff. And I went through a period of being, you know, like everybody else, you know, materialistic human being. You know, striving for being, you know, a manager at work and getting a house and an expensive car and all this sort of nonsense. And then eventually I went through a reprogramming as a result of an awakening process through a download I had in Sweden back in 2000. And as a result of that, I went through a healing course with a lady who was a first generation student of Barbara Brennan. And I liked that because she was a scientist. Part of that involved channeling information about the patient so you could get a more bespoke healing for them. And in doing that, I found out I could go to different levels that were above what I was being taught to go for the healing, above the 7 levels that are associated with the chakras. And I started to go higher and higher and higher. It took a long time at first, an awfully long time. It was like an hour and a half meditation to get somewhere, and then about an hour and a half to get back again for about a 10-minute interaction with somebody. Now I can just do it because I know the shortcuts, so to speak. But when I picked up the information, and I still do now, I check whether it's me talking to me, whether it is something I've seen in the past, like in a magazine or a TV or talk to somebody, or whether it's real. And I can tell whether it's real because the information is not known to me in any way, shape or form. The sentences that are used to construct and convey the information to me, or the images, are completely different to my own knowledge or the way I would speak. And the feeling that I get when I get the information is also there as well. So there are times when I get information that I inherently know, but I can't explain it in human terms. So I sit there. How am I going to explain this? Because it's like understanding the theory behind what a God particle is, but not being able to convey it in a language. Yeah? Yeah. We're all made of God particle, by the way. It's everywhere. Every part of us, whether it's physical or not, or energetic, is part of God. So while these scientists are looking for a God particle, it's in there. Okay, it is it. So basically, I have to go through. I check within myself whether it feels right, is right, and whether it's something I've regurgitated. Yeah. So it's constant check, and everybody who channels information should be going through this process because it's so easy to think it's you. You think you're getting it from somewhere else, and it's been in your memory for about 25 years. And you just pull it forwards. So, yeah. So I'm still channeling information. The book I'm doing right now is a book on healing, which is involving some channeling, but not much. It's basically about what I've learned.
What's the most important thing that you found with your research and studies?
Most important thing? Yeah? It's rather personal, and it's one, it makes me calmer, calmer, and 2, it's my way of being of service to people. That's the most important thing. That's what I found. Being of service and helping other people understand that they are not the human body, that they are much bigger than the human body. That's the most important thing. And that this information is just one small pixel on the largest high-definition display you're ever going to see in your life. There's other information out there that's just as accurate. Some will be more accurate later, but may become more expensive because we're higher frequency. And being part of that stepping stone is an absolute honour and a privilege. Yeah, that's it. I think it's lunchtime, isn't it?